George Orwell, the renowned author of 1984 and Animal Farm, once said, "Journalism is printing what someone else does not want printed. Everything else is public relations." Ladies and gentlemen, Winnipeg Alternative Media presents Watchdog Weekly. No BS, no PR, all journalism. And now your host, Shawn Henry.
Excellent. Thank you, as always, for playing me in with that wonderful intro to my awesome producer. And thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, one and all. Welcome, fellow Watchdogs, to another and what is the final episode of Media Watchdog Weekly. I am your host, as always, Shawn Henry. And as always, joining me from the wonderful city, I guess province, I was going to say state, but this is Canada, not the United States. Joining me from Edmonton, Alberta, as always, is my awesome co-host, Alex Ferguson. How's it going out west there today, buddy?
It's going pretty good.
Awesome.
Been sunny for the last couple days.
Nice. Same here, actually. It's been really nice the last couple of days. I hear that as of now, anyways, as of today, at least if from what I remember reading, Alberta's government, provincial government, is still resisting on the whole COVID vaccine passport thing. So that's somewhat encouraging.
We're resisting on that, but I just read something that as of September 3rd, indoor gatherings in Edmonton or all of Alberta, you have to be masked again. They're bringing back the mask mandate. It's like, okay, guys.
It's hilarious that you bring that up. We'll get to the mask issue. I know that that's a topic of discussion that has come up so many freaking times on this live stream that it's almost getting annoying, but we are going to talk about it one more time tonight. So we have that to look forward to. So that's fucking ridiculous. It's like here in Manitoba, we've gone the complete opposite route, basically, where I shouldn't say the complete opposite route, because I think masks are mandatory in indoor public places again already. And then starting September 3rd, you have to provide proof of vaccination in order to get into like restaurants, essential services, things like that. And if you're working in one of the fields that involves working with what they're calling quote unquote vulnerable populations, then you are going to be required to either be double vaccinated or, according to the wording of the memo that I got at my job, you have to submit to testing up to 3 times a week, basically just so that you can continue to go and do your job. So Manitoba is moving forward with the whole COVID vaccine passport thing, at least for the time being. But hilariously enough, what they're not doing is all the things that have actually been proven to be effective at preventing the spread of COVID-19, like limiting the number of people that are allowed in an establishment and social distancing and all that stuff. Like they're still encouraging social distancing in restaurants and grocery stores, etc., what have you. But there hasn't been any like capacity limits put in place like there were for 8 to 9 months, I think, something like that, where during, I think, the second and third wave of the pandemic here in Manitoba, we were under strict like 25% capacity, 50% capacity, depending on what our pandemic response level was. So for the longest time, you were only allowed to have 25% capacity in your restaurant or in your business, 50% capacity in your restaurant or in your business. Now that we're apparently freaking out about this fourth wave because the Delta variant is so dangerous, we're making people wear masks and we're making people prove that they're vaccinated again. But we're not limiting the number of people that can attend a business or attend a sporting event or something like that. Like, despite the fact that you can still catch COVID if you're double vaccinated, you can still transmit COVID to another person if you're double vaccinated, you can still die from COVID even if you're double vaccinated. They're just letting these people go willy-nilly do whatever they want, go pack restaurants, pack sporting events, pack concerts, pack nightclubs and dance halls and whatever else. Dance halls. What am I, like fucking 60? But anyways, I'm going off on a whole rant. This is not Friday. This is not Wham Rants. Wham Rants hasn't really been a thing for quite some time now. We might have to bring it back, though. I know that I'm done with this weekly live stream moving forward, but every once in a while I might just get worked up enough to kind of pop in and do another Wham Rants episode. So we might have that to look forward to in the meantime, or in the future, I should say. But in the meantime, we have tonight's show to get through first before we do anything else. We have a really, really good show for everybody tonight. As I mentioned at the very top of the show after the intro, this is unfortunately going to be the final episode of Media Watchdog Weekly. As I mentioned on the live stream 2 weeks ago, the last live stream Q&A we did, unfortunately, it's just not really tenable for me to keep doing these live streams moving forward. They have just unfortunately fallen too far down my personal priorities list for me to continue put the amount of time and effort into preparing them every 2 weeks as I have been. So this sadly will be the last episode of Media Watchdog Weekly, at least for the time being. We're saying just what I have been saying is that I'm going on an indefinite hiatus. So leaving the door open for me to possibly make a glorious, triumphant return at some point in the future. So I guess keep your fingers crossed if you're a fan of this live stream, because as of right now, tonight's show is the last show until I change my mind at some point in the future again. Now, that being said, we have great opening topics, multiple opening topics for the show tonight. Normally, I only do one opening segment, but in honor of this being our last live stream, I'm going to be doing 3 stories for our opening segment tonight. We're going to be doing kind of a quick, brief overview of all 3 of them, and then I'm going to highly recommend that you all go and read them and check them out for yourself, as I always do. And then after we get through our opening segments, we're going to move into part 2 of the live stream that I started a month ago now, which was tips for more effective and influential communication. But before we get to any of that, before we get to our 3 opening topics, before we get to our part 2 of effective communication tips, I, as always, have some housekeeping and some announcements, some notes that I have to go over before we get started. So I'm going to take a quick sip of water and we're going to roll. As always, Media Watchdog Weekly is streaming live to both Winnipeg Alternative Media and the Mactown Smackdown. You can find Winnipeg Alternative Media and the Mactown Smackdown on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. I'm pretty sure Winnipeg Alternative Media is on Odyssey and BitChute at this point. Go and search pretty much any social media platform that you can find, any social media platform that you're already a part of. Go and search for Winnipeg Alternative Media and the Mactown Smackdown. And if you find us, leave the pages a like. We really appreciate it. It really helps to continue us to grow and expand and reach more people, get the good word out to more and more people, help more and more people start to hopefully do their own thinking and make their own decisions again. So you can find both Winnipeg Alternative Media and the Mactown Smackdown on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Odyssey. Go and follow us everywhere you can. Like, follow, subscribe, whatever the hell the thing is that you're supposed to do on that particular social media site. Please talking. Okay. I think we're okay. Sorry, everybody. I think we're okay. As I was saying, make sure that you share every chance that you get. Share the posts that you see us make. Share just our page addresses. It, like I said, helps us grow, helps us expand, helps us reach more people. And that's really ultimately the goal of any media company, is to reach as many people as possible. Now, that being said, on the increasingly likely chance moving forward into the future that Winnipeg Alternative Media and or the Mactown Smackdown gets taken down off of platforms like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Twitch, you can find everything Winnipeg Alternative Media at our new website. That is right here at the bottom left corner of the screen. That would be www.winnipegalternativemedia.live, not .com, not .ca, winnipegalternativemedia.live. So go and check out the new website. And while you're there, one of the best ways that you can support Winnipeg Alternative Media is to scroll down to the bottom of the main homepage of the new website. And there will be a big button at the bottom of the page that gives you the option to download Winnipeg Alternative Media's new streaming app. That is right. Winnipeg Alternative Media has their own streaming app now. That's pretty legit, pretty official, if you ask me. It's a pretty good look for the organization, if you ask me. So If you are sick of getting your feed flooded with the same old tired fear-mongering clickbait, ragebait posts from the CBC and CTV and City News and CNN and Fox News and whoever else, and you want to get more Winnipeg Alternative Media, go to winnipegalternativemedia.live and scroll down to the bottom of the homepage and download the streaming app for Winnipeg Alternative Media, and you'll be able to see and listen to pretty much everything we post, as long as it's in video form, I'm assuming. While you're there, the other way, we do not have a donate button. Okay, so I was about to go into ways that you can support Winnipeg Alternative Media in a more financial sense, because as I mentioned at the beginning and the end of every live stream, we here at Winnipeg Alternative Media, myself, Alex, the other producers, the other streamers, the other content creators, our publishers, our editors, whoever else we have working behind the scenes, we're all volunteers. We do this out of the goodness of our hearts and the goodness of our wallets, because none of us makes one red hot cent to do the work that we do here with Winnipeg Alternative Media. We do it because we think it's important and we think it needs to be done. And we either don't see anybody else doing it, or we see other people doing it, but not as well as we think we could have done it ourselves. So we started to do it ourselves. That being said, despite the fact that we are all volunteers here, there are still the odd costs and expenses here and there to keep the lights on and keep the shows going and keep the content being created. So if you are looking to help support Winnipeg Alternative Media in a more direct financial monetary sense, the best way that you can do that is to go to the new website, which I just mentioned, winnipegalternativemedia.live. And I believe as you scroll down from the top of the page, the very first thing that pops up on your screen is Winnipeg Alternative Media's awesome selection of branded merch. You can see at the bottom of the screen here, we've got t-shirts, tank tops, crop tops, children's t-shirts, pullover hoodies, zip-up hoodies, hats. We can make pretty much any article of clothing that you want to have Winnipeg Alternative Media's logo on it. We can make the logo for Winnipeg Alternative Media be on it if you really want to. So we used to have a donate button on the old website. I imagine we're probably working on getting one set up on the new website, but it's not up and running yet. But this buying merch and buying branded clothing is usually the way that I recommend people support Winnipeg Alternative Media if they want to do it that way anyways. If they want to support Winnipeg Alternative Media financially in the first place, this is usually the way that I recommend people do it, because that way you yourself get some sweet Winnipeg Alternative Media branded merch in return. Like I said, we got shirts, pullover hoodies, zip-up hoodies, children's clothing, hats. And if you want a custom article of clothing, you can see, I can't point to it right now because I'm a tiny box over in the left-hand side. There we go. You can email winnipegaltmedia@gmail.com and get in touch with us there. And like I said, we can get pretty much any article of clothing that you want to have Winnipeg Alternative Media's logo on it. You could get a fanny pack. You could get Daisy Duke shorts with Wham on each butt cheek if you want. Pretty much anything you want. Reach out to us at winnipegaltmedia@gmail.com. We'll work out the details, work out the price, and then we can go from there. So that's a great way to show some financial support to Winnipeg Alternative Media, because once again, we are all volunteers who do not earn a red hot cent, and you get a little something for yourself in return. You get some new clothing that you can use to help support and spread the word from Winnipeg Alternative Media. We have a happy customer in the comment section already. Thank you, Shannon, for chiming in. She says, I love my Wham gear. That's awesome. So that is how you can help support us on a more financial sense.
W on one ass cheek and M on the other ass cheek.
Yeah, there you go. And then an A right in the crease of the butt crack.
Right.
Now, final thing before we jump into tonight's opening segment. As always, everything that we're about to look at tonight, all the articles that we're about to read, the photos that we're about to look at, anything that we're about to see and look at and whatever, watch, I guess, for lack of a better word, tonight together is going to immediately be posted to the Winnipeg Alternative Media Discord server immediately following the live stream. That's the link for this right here. We're going to be posting that in the comments over the course of the live stream as well. So you can copy and paste that from the comments. Go to the Winnipeg Alternative Media, go to Discord, join the Winnipeg Alternative Media Discord server, and then you go to the little sidebar thing that slides open, and there'll be different channels for all the different live streams and shows that Winnipeg Alternative Media does. You search go click on the Media Watchdog Weekly channel specifically, and that is where you will be able to find all of the links and references and citations and resources, whatever the hell you want to call them, from tonight's live stream and from all the previous live streams that I've ever done. Literally every article and every link that I've ever used as a reference for any episode of this live stream that I've ever done is on that Discord server. So I highly recommend people go and join the Winnipeg Alternative Media Discord server and check out all of these resources and references that we're about to look at together for themselves. Because as I mentioned at the beginning of every show, we're here as much as possible to just encourage people to do their own reading, do their own research, do their own thinking, come to their own conclusions, make their own decisions, and live their own life. We're not here to tell anybody what to do or what to think or how to live. We're here to just provide information as best we can, as objectively as we can, with as little bias and as little with as little twisting and swaying of the message and framing is the word I'm looking for here, with as little framing of the stories as possible. And one of the best ways that we can do that is just have people do it for themselves. So I highly recommend that people go and join the Winnipeg Alternative Media Discord server after the show tonight or at any point during the show tonight. And then immediately following tonight's broadcast, all the references and resources that we're going to look at will be posted to that Discord server. So please go and check them out for yourself, especially after tonight's show, because there's going to be some really, really, really good resources and references in that Discord server that you are not going to want to miss out on, that you're probably going to want to share around with your friends and family. So make sure you go and join the Winnipeg Alternative Media Discord server. And just one final reminder before we jump into tonight's opening segments, because there are 3 of them as opposed to the usual one. The reason that there are 3 opening segments because instead of the usual one is because, as we mentioned a few times already, tonight is the final episode of Media Watchdog Weekly, at least for the time being. I'm going on indefinite hiatus following tonight's live stream. So enjoy it while you can. And without any further ado, we will jump into our opening segments. So normally, like I said, I only do 1 opening segment just for the sake of time. But since tonight is the last live stream that we're going to be doing together, I decided to do 3 opening segments for everybody because I had such a hard time choosing between these 3 things that I decided to just say, screw it, and let's do them all. We'll do it live, I guess, is ultimately what I boiled down to deciding. So first, if Alex can have my intro clips ready, I'm going to try not to do this too quickly so that he can keep them in proper order.
Oh, I'm good. I
good?
fixed my internet.
Perfect. Okay.
I
awesome.
smacked her around like a little bitch.
Just go show it who's boss.
That's
so
right.
The first article that we're going to cover tonight, the first topic that we are going to join tonight or do tonight, our first opening segment, is a good news, everyone segment. So, Alex, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes. I see. Good news, everyone.
So, our first opening segment tonight from our friends at True North News. The reason that I bring this article to everyone's attention and the reason that I'm calling it good news is because good news, we might not be as alone and outnumbered and overwhelmed and isolated as we think. Us people who are viewing what is going on in politics and government these days as just tyrannical power grabs and people scrambling to maintain their influence and maintain their power. This article from True North Media, again, is a happy little breath of fresh air to let you know that maybe you're not as alone as you might think you are. From August 24th, from Cosmin Surdza, I think. I'm just going to say Cosmin D. 62% of Canadians think Trudeau's snap election is a power grab. That's good news as far as I'm concerned, because I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a power grab, as Justin Trudeau trying to cling and clutch to the last little bit of waning power and influence that he does have. I think he's trying to solidify his place in the current government before things get too much worse for him. So I wouldn't describe it so much as a power grab as more of a power clutch, as in he's trying not to let what power he still has get away from him. Because I don't think realistically, based on other articles that I've read about how Trudeau and the Liberals campaign for this election is going, I don't think gaining extra power or grabbing extra power is really a realistic goal for Trudeau and the Liberals right now. So we read, a majority of Canadians view Liberal Party leader Justin Trudeau's snap election call negatively, according to the latest poll by Ledger. Now, we've talked about polls on this live stream a lot lately. And I normally don't put a ton of stock in them, but sometimes I'm more inclined to believe that the statistics or the numbers that come out of these polls are more accurate. The reason that I am inclined to believe that this number is not maybe point on dead on accurate, but at least more accurate than your average poll results is because the type of people, and as this is kind of just an assumption on my part, and I don't like making assumptions. I don't like to assume things because we know what that does to you and me. But my assumption, and based on my logic and reasoning that I use to come to this conclusion, the type of people that would be most likely to respond to this type of poll are also, as far as I can tell, the type of people that would be more likely to participate in the voting process and participate in the governmental process, which is probably why they have such strong opinions towards it in the first place. Because I can't see people like myself who have never voted and don't ever intend on voting unless something very drastic changes in the future, responding to this poll. Like if someone like me, or at least if I shouldn't say if someone like me, if I was asked to take this poll about what I thought of Trudeau's intentions behind calling a snap election, I would probably just walk away or hang up and tell the person to go fuck themselves because I can't be bothered to take the time and effort that it requires to talk to you. But people that are more likely to respond to these polls, or this type of poll specifically, are probably also people that are more likely to be more directly involved in the governmental political voting process. So that is kind of why I'm more inclined to believe that this number is at least somewhat more accurate than the average poll results. Of course, it's obviously not going to be spot on, and they even mention it further down in the article here. We're going to read a little bit further. The survey, which was commissioned by Post Media, found that 62%. Post Media also tends to take a fairly, I don't want to say favorable, but milquetoast approach to covering government and political stories. They kind of tend to just barely scratch the surface and try not to rock the boat too much one way or another, from what I can tell. But they have been fairly friendly to Trudeau and the Liberals in the past, based on what I've seen from Post Media. So the survey, commissioned by Post Media, found that 62% of Canadians described 2021 election as a power grab by Trudeau. I really wish that they would start rephrasing things like this. It's not 62% of Canadians described the 2021 election as a power grab. It's 62% of Canadians who could be bothered to respond to the poll in the first place described the 2021 election as a power grab by Trudeau. On the other hand, only 38% reported that the election was an opportunity for Canadians to be part of the decision regarding Canada's post-pandemic future. Ledger surveyed 2,002 Canadians online between August 20th to 22nd, 2021 to get the results. If collected from a random sample, a similar poll would have a margin of error of plus or minus 2.2% 19 times out of 20. So this 62%? That 62% could be either 60% or 64%, admittedly, based on their own numbers. This is something actually I wish more articles regarding polls included in their write-ups, the kind of basic parameters of how the poll was done in the first place. That's generally one of the first things you're supposed to talk about, as my understanding, when you're talking about poll findings, is you're supposed to talk about how you came up with your results in the first place. Show your work, basically, on the other hand, or in other words, I should say. Man, my mouth is not really cooperating with me tonight. That's awesome. With regard to the election's timing, an even larger majority said it was a bad time to go to the polls. Survey results found that a nice number of Canadians believed that the election could have waited until next year or later. That's 69% of Canadians. I said a nice number of Canadians, but that's just because 69 is the nice number. So survey results, again, they need to slightly rework the wording here. Survey results found that a nice amount of Canadians who could be bothered to respond to the poll in the first place believed that the election could have waited until next year or later. Meanwhile, only 21% responded 2021 was a good time to have an election. So that's as far as we're going to go in this article. It goes on for a little bit longer here. But that's pretty much as I think I covered all the most important parts. We talked about the 69%, the nice number of Canadians. That was an important bit. We've got to make sure we talk about 69. We talked about how 62% of the Canadians that responded, who are also people who are most likely, or more likely at least in my understanding, to be involved in the political process, believe that it's just a power grab by Trudeau. He's just trying to cling to whatever little power he has left before another election actually comes and they get completely ousted. But yeah, this is my good news, everyone segment. So again, good news, everyone. you might not be as alone and isolated in your way of thinking and your perspectives on things as you might think. And I've talked about this numerous times on the live stream in the past, and I talk about this all the time just in my day-to-day life, especially these days with everything that's going on in COVID. Most people these days, I would argue the vast majority of people have public perceptions that they allow other people to hear and to know about, and then private perceptions that they don't let other people hear. Just based on personal conversations that I've had with a pretty wide variety of people, nobody really agrees with the current rules and thinks that they make a lot of sense and that they're for the best for everyone, regarding whether it be regarding masks, vaccine passports, social distancing, self-isolation, any of those things. Most people that I talk to privately on a personal level disagree with them and think that it's a little bit of an overreach and it's a little unnecessary. But almost none of those people, a very small percentage of those people, are actually willing to make those thoughts known and make those beliefs known because they're scared of being shamed and socially isolated and excommunicated and whatever. They're scared of being kicked out of the tribe, essentially. It's one of our deepest rooted fears as humans, is the fear of being ejected and rejected from the tribe. Because back in the day,
you've been voted off Canada.
Basically, you've been voted off the island. But back in the day, when we were living like our hunter-gatherer lifestyle, being voted off the island meant your fucking ass. It didn't just mean you were off the game show. It meant you were more than likely gonna die a pretty gruesome, horrible death. So it's a very, very deep-rooted fear in people, this fear of being ejected and rejected by society and by the tribe. So I totally understand why people have these thoughts and opinions and beliefs that they're so scared to express out in public, because the second that they express these thoughts and opinions out in public, they get shunned and shamed and excommunicated and alienated and isolated and whatever else. So I totally get where people are coming from. But just know that it's important to keep that in mind, that just because people are saying one thing in public when everybody is looking at them, when the lights and the cameras are on, doesn't necessarily mean they actually believe that thing in private in their heart of hearts. So that's the end of our first opening segment. We're going to jump right into our next one here. Our second opening segment is a recommendations segment. So Alex, if you wouldn't mind hitting my next intro clip. Excellent. Okay, now for the recommendations portion of tonight's opening segment trio, I'm going to recommend to people a new news website or news app that I found that I honestly just downloaded this morning, but that I am already a huge fan of. It's a program, or I guess an app, website/app called News 360, all one word, NEWS 360. Very simple to download, very easy to find. The main difference between an app like News 360 and just getting your news through Google News is that Google News only allows like a fraction of a percentage of the available articles and news out there to actually make its way through their filtering process and onto your dashboard. News 360, from what I can tell, has no such qualms about filtering things out. And you know what? Actually, I'm just going to pull up a video here. I'm going to Instagram, everybody. Come with me. We're going on an adventure. I'm doing a terrible job of explaining this. I'm just going to go to the Instagram page where I learned about this app in the first place, and we're going to let Mr. Dave Asprey, who many of you may be familiar with as the Bulletproof Coffee Guy, we are going to let Dave tell us what's up with News 360, because the short video that he made does a way better job of explaining things than I just did. So take it away, Davo. Please and thank you. Okay, good. Awesome. Let's unmute us.
Use news online. This is the typical Google News feed. They customize it for me to make me afraid. Bunch of political crap, bunch of gloom. Someone died of COVID, which happens. People die of all sorts of things every day. and a lot of fear and loathing, and they tell me the same crap over and over. This is why I don't use Google News very often. Here's what I do instead that has absolutely changed my outlook on life. I installed this app called News 360. No, I don't have any relationship with the company. I just use it. And you go through and you say, hey, here's the stuff I care about. And you like things that are interesting to you. And you dislike things that aren't interesting to you. And it learns what you like. And it filters out all the garbage, all the fear, all the political nonsense. So without knowing what would be here, an antibody that protects us from various COVID-19 viruses. Do you guys follow MedIndia? They actually have good stuff, but I didn't know until I found it here. And when I scroll down, existing drugs kill. Oh my goodness, why didn't Google show me that? That's so weird. And maybe I don't care so much about immune cells and coral, so I'll say, don't want to say that anymore. And some weird health thing about heartburn, not technical enough. And I can go through and I can look at what's happening throughout the news world of stuff that I care about, and it's relaxing and there's nothing annoying. This thing, dead. I don't care about case counts, so I get rid of it. And I can tell it, don't show me anything COVID, and it'll take it away. So if you want to be relaxed, stop using Google News. It is a complete poison for your mind. Go to News 360, and you can just tell it what you want and tell it what you don't want. It'll learn and get better over time. That's one of the reasons I'm so calm, I'm so focused, and I believe I'm still reality-based. Have an awesome day. I hope that helped.
Thanks, Dave. So, like I said, Dave does a way better job of explaining that whole situation than I just did. Basically, as I was struggling to say earlier, the main difference between getting your news from like Google or Facebook or Twitter or versus getting your news from News 360 is pages like Facebook, Twitter, Google, etc. are going to fill your feed with things that they think are going, like it's a little bit of stuff that you've clicked on, like it'll give you stuff related to stuff that you've clicked on and followed in the past, but with Facebook and Twitter especially. But with Google, pretty much all Google News does is pick the stuff that they think is going to get the most clicks, whether that be getting clicks via scaring people, getting clicks via pissing people off. They're basically just pumping out whatever they think is going to get the most clicks on it. And they don't really care about providing you with things that you're actually really interested in or care about. Whereas with News 360, as Dave was saying in that short video, it's entirely based on your feedback. You say, yes, I like this. No, I don't like this. You've got sex, psychology, money tips, mental health, anxiety, health tips. You can scroll down and there's just articles here. I can't show you the mobile app right now because it's obviously on my cell phone. But I really, really like the layout of the mobile app. They've got it just as set up like you have your home news feed, similar to what Facebook has, where it's just a lot of the more recent articles that came up. You can go to your local news. They have a local news section at the bottom. And the thing that I like the most about that is that they didn't force you to turn on location services on your cell phone in order to have location-based news articles pop up. You can just manually type in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and then it will set your location as just Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. It doesn't give super specific like your address and your postal code and all that shit. So it does offer location-based articles and location-based news, but you don't have to actively have your location services on your cell phone turned on in order for that to work. I was a really big fan of that. They also have like the trending tab or whatever, basically, where it's like the newest, hottest, latest breaking news. So it's really customizable. You can set up and organize your news feed a bunch of different ways. And like Dave was saying, it actually shows you things that you care about. Only shows you the things that you want to see. And then if it shows you something you don't want to see, you can give it a thumbs down or just ask them not to show it to you, and it won't show them to you anymore. So that is my recommendation for everybody tonight, is that everybody is recommended that you go out and download News 360, whether it be the mobile app, whether it be setting up an account on the desktop website. It was super easy to set up an account. All they want is an email address and a password. You can log in with Facebook, Google, whatever, but all they wanted from me to just set up an account separately was an email, which I just gave them an old junk email that I don't use for anything anymore, and a random password, and you're good to go. So that is my recommendation for everybody tonight, is to go and check out /download this News 360 app, this News 360 website. And like Dave said, kind of pay attention to the difference between how this news feed interacts with you and how news feed from, say, Google or Facebook would interact with you. Now, quick sip of water. Jumping into our third and final opening segment. How are we doing for time here? We're 35 minutes in. We're actually doing not too bad. Okay, so moving forward now into our third and final opening segment. This is my new favorite opening segment. I know we have like 3 or 4 different segments that we do, but this one has quickly become my favorite. And Alex, if you're ready, and I would really appreciate you could play me in with my intro clip. Ladies and gentlemen, well, we are about to head into our final, I hate to say I told you so, but I told you so segment. So take it away, please, Alex.
I told you so. Told you so. Told you so. Told you so.
Awesome. That clip, honestly, is one of the main reasons that this whole told you so segment quickly became my favorite, because that's basically what I want to do in a lot of people's faces every single day, is just go, I fucking told you so. I fucking told you so. That's all I want to do a lot of the time these days. Now, as I mentioned earlier, and as Alex and I were doing our kind of opening pre-show banter, the topic of masks was going to come up again tonight, as it has numerous times on the podcast or the live stream, whatever you want to call this thing, in the past. And it has been a huge point of debate where so-called quote-unquote anti-mask conspiracy theory nuts have been falsely claiming that masks aren't effective at preventing the spread of COVID-19, basically since the beginning of the pandemic, because there is extensive peer-reviewed papers, meta-analyses, and systematic review is the word. I was gonna say systemic review, but I'm like, no, systemic isn't quite the right word. Meta-analyses and systematic reviews and peer-reviewed papers on how masks aren't really effective at preventing the spread of viruses in general, and that was constantly being quote-unquote debunked by the mainstream media and the establishment over the course of the last year and a half, because, well, that was outdated science. We have more updated science from more recently that says that, yes, masks are in fact effective. But if you actually dig too deeply into the actual like degree and quality of the science and scientific papers that quote unquote support and prove that masks are effective, they're really low level science. It's like anecdotal data. It's I can't remember my scientific hierarchy of scientific evidence, case studies, animal studies, rodent studies, and a lot of it, most of it, I would argue, hasn't really been either peer reviewed or replicated. But I found this article from The Blaze just this morning. Study finds mask mandates have no substantial effect on slowing COVID-19 spread. You don't freaking say. Now, I can already hear the mainstream media and the establishment cronies and the bootlickers out there on social media. Oh, but that's just one study. It doesn't mean anything. Blah, 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 blah. It's probably not even peer reviewed. Well, it is actually, and it's really high quality data because it's actually data that was taken from the real world and real people over the last year to year and a half, as opposed to being like based on modeling or mannequin tests or rodent tests. But they go into that in quite good detail here in the article. So let us just read from The Blaze, from Chris Pandolfo, from just this morning. With students finally headed back to school for the fall, debate is raging nationwide over whether K-12 children should be required to wear face masks to reduce the spread of COVID-19. But a peer-reviewed study, which I will also link to the Discord server after the live stream tonight, suggests that mask use and requirements during the pandemic had no substantial impact on reducing the spread of the virus. Researchers from the University of Louisville examined COVID-19 case growth and mask use in the United States, comparing states with mask mandates to states without, and found that, quote, mask mandates and use likely did not affect COVID-19 case growth, end quote. The researchers say as well, quote, for our study, we wanted to determine if effects of mask mandates and use were observable in the general population, said Dr. Damian Guerra, an assistant professor of biology at the University of Louisville. Quote, essentially, did the theory of mask effectiveness hold up on a population-wide level? Guerra observed that given the widespread adoption of mask requirements as a COVID-19 mitigation strategy, there was a need to evaluate the effectiveness of that policy. He told The Blaze in an email that previous studies on mask wearing using case studies, mannequin experiments, or theoretical models had produced conflicting results, but his study used states without mask mandates as a control group to better gauge the effectiveness of the policy. So as I was saying before we started reading the article, this is actually really high quality, high caliber level science based on real world data, whereas a lot of the admittedly conflicting results from other studies are mannequin experiments, case studies, theoretical models, i.e. super low level science, not peer-reviewed real world data. Quote, it appears that mandates and typical mask use among the public have no substantial impact on COVID-19 growth, Guerra said. Early in the pandemic, i.e. summer 2020, there was an association between lower infection rates and mask mandates and use. However, this association disappeared when transmission levels rose despite increased mask use in the fall and winter. While growth rates did decline in states after mask mandates became effective, rates declined to a similar degree in states without mandates, Guerra added. Mask wearing is an issue that has become controversial and politicized, with heated arguments between those who support mandates and those against. According to a recent Axios/Ipsos poll, a majority, or 69%, a nice amount of Americans, support mask mandates in schools, but opinion is sharply divided by political ideology. Democrats overwhelmingly support requiring masks in schools, with 92% in support, while only 44% of Republicans support mask mandates. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends that anyone who is not vaccinated against COVID-19 and is older than age 2 should wear a mask in indoor public spaces. The Delta variant of the coronavirus, which has proved to be more contagious than previous variants, is fueling fears that unmasked students and school faculty, even those who are vaccinated, could spread disease rapidly and endanger children who may be vulnerable to the virus, such as those with pre-existing health conditions or weaker immune systems. In response, and in accordance with guidance from the CDC, states like New York have implemented mandatory mask requirements for students, staff, and visitors inside school buildings with the goal of reducing the risk of spreading the virus. However, some concerned parents have objected to requiring their children to wear masks. In the United States, the average length of the school day is 6.64 hours. These parents are worried that requiring their children to wear face masks for that prolonged period indoors can be unsanitary, have negative effects on mental health and cognitive development, and put children at an increased risk of hypercapnia, which is a word that I've never heard before. And how did I miss that the first time I was reading through this? From exhaling and then inhaling CO2. Okay, so I'm assuming hypercapnia is just a fancy scientific term for having elevated CO2 levels in your blood, I'm assuming. In response to their concerns, Republican governors in 8 states have taken steps to prohibit local school districts from implementing mask requirements without giving parents the ability to opt their kids out. We're not going to go any further in this article. It goes a little further it goes on for quite a bit longer, but we already covered the most important told you so moment, according to this real world peer-reviewed study that was using non-mask mandated states as the control group and mask mandated states as the study group, I guess, the research group. They found that, what was the quote? It appears that mandates and typical mask use among the public have no substantial impact on COVID-19 growth. While growth rates did decline in states after mask mandates became effective, rates declined to a similar degree in states without mandates. So, again, I hate to say I told you so, establishment cronies and mainstream media and government officials and so-called quote-unquote health experts and health authorities. But it looks like the anti-mask unhinged conspiracy theory nuts turns out they were right again. And the court, according to this most recent, most high-quality piece of scientific literature, whether you wore a mask or not didn't make any difference in slowing the spread of COVID-19. So as Alex is getting ready here to play me out with my outro clip for this segment, and we get ready to move into our main segment of tonight's show, I would just like to say one last time, I hate to say I told you so, but I fucking told you so. So, Alex, if you could play me out, please, that'd be great.
I told you so. Told you so. Told you so. Told you so.
Awesome. Thank you very much, sir, for always helping out with the show. It's been much appreciated this entire time.
Anytime.
Don't find it fair because I'm immune to COVID-19 and don't require the shot. So I think it's BS, but that's just one man's opinion. Yeah, no, I'm not sure who it was that left this comment here, but I absolutely agree. I've been talking about this a lot lately.
That was me. It's to the comment to this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I wrote this, but it got cut off.
The view on vaccine passports is that it's absurd because as this new research is coming out of Israel. Israel is one of, if not the most highly vaccinated countries on the planet. They have the best available data as to the effectiveness of these COVID-19 vaccines at preventing severe infection and preventing transmission. This piece of this study or this piece of research, granted, hasn't been peer reviewed yet. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if it never winds up getting peer reviewed just because of how inconvenient the findings are. But according to this new piece of research coming out of Israel, people who have been previously infected with COVID-19 and have not been vaccinated have, I think it was 6 to 7 times better protection from the new variants than people who were only vaccinated and didn't have a previous infection. Again, keep in mind, like I said, that article or that research hasn't been peer reviewed yet. And like I was saying, based on how inconvenient the findings are, I wouldn't be surprised if it never gets peer reviewed. But that's kind of the story that's coming out of Israel right now, which again is one of, if not the most highly vaccinated countries in the world, is that if you're previously infected, you have 6 to 7 times better immunity to the virus and to new variants than if you were to get vaccinated. So knowing that, we know that, and we also know that there was this other article that came out of, or this new other piece of science that came out of Israel just a week or two ago that was saying that vaccinated people are spreading the virus and transmitting the virus just as frequently and just as easily as unvaccinated people. So now we know that you can still catch COVID-19 even if you're fully vaccinated. You can still transmit COVID-19 if you're even if you're fully vaccinated. You can still die from COVID-19 even if you're fully vaccinated. And you can catch, transmit, and die from it if you're unvaccinated. So you can catch COVID, transmit COVID, and die from COVID, whether you're vaccinated or not. So why does it make any sense to have unvaccinated people like myself have to jump through all these additional hoops just to participate in society? And meanwhile, all these vaccinated people who can transmit the virus just as easily and get just as sick and die just as easily are able to just go around and do whatever the fuck they want without having to think twice about it. It doesn't make any goddamn sense. So that's my views on the vaccine passport.
It's funny because just saw an article or read an article about a cruise ship who it was mandatory. Everybody on the cruise ship, staff, passengers, everybody was vaccinated. Over 50% of the crew got coronavirus. Yep.
I remember reading that article as well. And like 20, 25 or 30 passengers wound up catching it too or something like that. Which, to be fair, vaccinated or unvaccinated, that's what you get for going on a cruise as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah.
I have heard horror stories about how disgusting those cruise ships are.
Oh, everybody gets the flu. You get the flu. Mm-hmm. It's like before this, you'd go on a cruise ship and you'd like, oh, yeah, we had a flu for like 2 weeks after. And it's like, well,
people get the flu, they get salmonella, E. coli, like just all kinds of food poisoning. Yeah, I had an ex-girlfriend who worked on cruise ships for like 2 or 3 years, and just some of the stories that I was told. Oh
no,
God. Yeah, oh no is right. Okay, so without any further ado, we're almost an hour into our show, and we are finally ready to move into tonight's main topic. Which sounds about right for me. I figured tonight's show was going to run a little long, just with it being the last one and everything. Tonight's main topic is going to be part 2 of my tips for more effective and influential communication. I think I joked about this on the live stream part 1 of this topic a month ago about how I wanted to call it how to communicate with people so that they actually want to give a shit about what you have to say and not just run away screaming and looking at you like you're crazy. But that's way too much of a mouthful to fit on like a banner for like a Facebook post or anything like that. So we shortened it to effective communication tips or effective and influential communication tips. So We covered numbers 1 through 6 on the live stream that we did a month ago on, what was that, August 2nd. And tonight we are going to cover items 7 through 12. If you missed the first live stream, part 1, I highly recommend that you go back and check it out. I didn't really organize these 12 items into like a certain order of any kind. I just kind of wrote them down as they popped into my head. That being said, I feel like a lot of the better points kind of wound up on the first show. I was looking back over my notes, and tonight's show isn't going to be bad. I have some good points to make tonight, but I just feel like more of the good points that I had to make regarding effective communication wound up being on that part 1 of the live stream from August 2nd. So I highly recommend that you go back and check out that live stream from 4 weeks ago now, I guess, and make sure that you're all caught up, because otherwise some of these items that we're going to, or some of these tips items that we're going to go through here tonight might not make as much sense as they would have otherwise. Because I think if I remember correctly, refer back to part 1 of the live stream a couple of times. But that being said, I'm ranting and rambling. What else is new? Let's jump into it. I'm going to start with, I guess this is tip number 7. It is very simple. Well, I shouldn't say it's very simple. It's simple to say, a lot harder to do. Most things are. Tip number 7 is to practice empathy, or to put it more simply for people that might not understand what that word means, just walk a mile in the other person's shoes. Try to feel and understand where the other person is coming from when you're talking to them and conversing with them. Whether it be one other person, a group of other people, try your best to practice empathy and put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're talking to or debating with. Understand where they're coming from, why they feel the way that they feel, why they're saying the things that they're saying. One of the best tips that I have, and one of the best methods that I have for practicing empathy myself, is especially when I'm talking to someone, when I'm the one doing the talking, I try to do a check-in of my body language, my tone of voice, the words that I'm using, and I ask myself, how would I respond to this if I was the other person? Like, how would I respond to the way that I'm communicating right now if I was the other person? If I was that person and the other person was me, and they were getting all worked up and their body language was getting all assertive and aggressive and their voice kept getting louder and louder, I'm going to be less and less likely to want to listen to what they have to say, because they're getting overly emotional, they're getting overly worked up, they're probably not going to make as good of points anymore. That being said, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, but it often winds up being that way. That's kind of my main issue. That's why that's the example that I gave, is I get a little too worked up sometimes. But again, ask yourself, as you're talking to someone, as you're conversing with someone or a group of other someones, how would you feel if they were communicating to you the way that you're communicating to them? Like, how would you feel if the roles were reversed? We're going to quickly, I don't know. Oh yeah, that's why I pulled that up. We're going to quickly go through this article from verywellmind.com. And I'm not going to read the whole article because it's quite lengthy and we've already almost been going for an hour. But we're going to touch on a few different points of it that I think are really important. This is an article from verywellmind.com called "What is Empathy?" Pretty straightforward title. I really like it. By Kendra Cherry from May 2nd, 2020. So about a year and a half ago now. What is empathy? There are 3 different types of empathy. There's effective empathy, which is the ability to respond to the other person's emotions appropriately. There's somatic empathy, which is the ability to feel what another person is feeling. That's something that I have a big, I was going to say problem with, depends on how you want to look at it. I feel a lot of what other people feel. Like, it gets to the point where if I'm watching a video and I see someone get hit in the nuts, my nuts kind of start to hurt a little bit. That's somatic empathy. If you watch someone get like hit in the arm with like a bat, and then your arm kind of starts to throb like you got hit in the arm with a bat, that's somatic empathy. And then there's cognitive empathy, which is the ability to understand someone's response to a situation. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier before we started in on this article, was try to understand where the other person is coming from. Try to understand why they're responding the way that they are. So from the article, what is empathy? Empathy is the ability to emotionally understand what other people feel, see things from their point of view, and imagine yourself in their place, or walk a mile in their shoes, as I said earlier. Essentially, it is putting yourself in someone else's position and feeling what they must be feeling. When you see another person suffering, you might be able to instantly envision yourself in the other person's place and feel sympathy for what they are going through. While people are generally pretty well attuned to their own feelings and emotions, that might not be as true as it was back a year and a half ago when this article was written. Getting into someone else's head can be a bit more difficult. As I said before we even started this point, this is way easier. Practicing empathy is way easier said than done. Empathy is just a word, but the act of being empathetic is quite complex. The ability to feel empathy allows people to walk a mile in another's shoes. Hey, here we are, so to speak. It permits people to understand the emotions that others are feeling. For many, seeing another person in pain and responding with indifference or even outright hostility seems utterly incomprehensible. But the fact that some people do respond in such a way clearly demonstrates that empathy is not necessarily a universal response to the suffering of others. Here are some signs that you are capable of experiencing or at least feeling empathy. These are some signs that show you that you tend to be an empathetic person. You're good at listening to what others have to say. People often tell you about their problems. You are good at picking up on how other people are feeling. You often think about how other people feel. Other people often come to you for advice. You often feel overwhelmed by tragic events. You try to help others who are suffering. You're good at telling people you are good at telling when people aren't being honest. You sometimes feel drained or overwhelmed in social situations. You care deeply about other people. That, I think, is just supposed to be part of being a human being, but whatever. You find it difficult to set boundaries in your relationships with other people. That's something I still struggle with myself from time to time, is setting boundaries with people and then honoring those boundaries that I myself am trying to set. Having a great deal of empathy makes you concerned for the well-being and happiness of others. It also means, however, that you can sometimes get overwhelmed, burnt out, or even overstimulated from always thinking about other people's emotions. Again, I'm still guilty of this quite a bit myself, still something I struggle with, still something I'm working on. There are 3 different types of empathy that a person may experience. Effective empathy involves the ability to understand another person's emotions and respond appropriately. Somatic empathy involves having a sort of physical reaction in response to what someone else is experiencing. People sometimes physically experience what another person is feeling. When you see someone else feeling embarrassed, for example, you might start to blush or have an upset stomach. I am notorious for that. It's not something I talk about a lot, but I have a really, really, really hard time watching people do embarrassing things. Like if I know that someone is like petrified of public speaking and then I have to watch them go up and give a speech, I feel so bad for them that I start to get like a little nauseous myself. So I deal with this a lot. I have a really hard time watching people do embarrassing things because I get embarrassed myself. While sympathy and compassion are related to empathy, there are important differences. Compassion and sympathy are often thought to involve more of a passive connection, while empathy generally involves a much more active attempt to understand another person. I'm going to read these last couple of sentences again, because this right here, I think, really drives home the whole point of this whole article, or one of the more important points of the article at the very least, which is that you have to actively practice being empathetic. It's not something that just happens. A lot of the time, you have to actually work on it. So again, compassion and sympathy are often thought to involve more of a passive connection, while empathy generally involves a much more active attempt to understand another person. You have to understand where the other person is coming from. We're going to skip over the section on uses and impact. We're going to touch on barriers to empathy, and then I think we're going to move on to reason number 8. I want to touch on these barriers to empathy because I think a lot of them should seem very familiar to a lot of people that are watching this live stream right now. So a few reasons why people sometimes lack empathy include cognitive biases, dehumanization, and victim blaming. Do any of those things sound familiar to anybody right now? Cognitive bias. Under cognitive biases, sometimes the way people perceive the world around them is influenced by a number of cognitive biases. For example, people often attribute other people's failures to internal characteristics while blaming their own shortcomings on external factors. That's something that we see a lot these days. Anytime someone else does something wrong, it's 100% their fault. It's a result of their character and their choices and their decisions. But anytime I fuck up, it's someone else's fault. It's because My boss was extra hard on me at work last week. My dog kept me up all night last night, so I'm extra tired and cranky. It's always something else. It's never my fault. It's never a result of my choices and my character when I fuck up. But when you fuck up, these biases can make it difficult to see all the factors that contribute to a situation and make it less likely that people will be able to see a situation from the perspective of another. Dehumanization. This is a big one these days. Many also fall victim to the trap of thinking that people who are different from them also don't feel and behave the same as they do. This is particularly common in cases where other people are physically distant, or when we're all being forced to self-isolate in our homes and not go out and see each other. For example, when they watch reports of a disaster or a conflict in a foreign land, people might be less likely to feel empathy if they think that those who are suffering are fundamentally different from themselves. Victim blaming. Again, this is probably the biggest problem out of the three of these between cognitive biases, dehumanization, and victim blaming. Victim blaming is probably the thing that I see the most frequently and the most commonly these days. Sometimes when another person has suffered a terrible experience, people make the mistake of blaming the victim for their circumstances. This is the reason why victims of crimes are often asked what they might have done differently to prevent the crime. What were you wearing? What were you doing at the time that this man sexually assaulted you? Why were you walking there? Why were you there alone at this time of day? That's all classic victim blaming. Sometimes they're legitimate questions. Most of the time it's just victim blaming. This tendency stems from the need to believe that the world is a fair and just place. It is not. People want to believe that people get what they deserve and deserve what they get, which in large part is true. I'm a big believer in karma, but sometimes karma's not perfect. Sometimes things slip by, makes it through quality control without getting the proper quality control, I guess. I don't know how else I was supposed to say that. It fools them into thinking that such terrible things could never happen to them. Spoiler alert, sometimes shitty things happen to good people for no real good reason. Sometimes shitty things just happen. That's just a reality of life. Tips for practicing empathy. Fortunately, empathy is a skill that you can learn and strengthen. If you would like to build your empathy skills, there are a few things that you can do. Work on listening to people without interrupting. This is something I still struggle with again. You're going to hear me say that a lot these days. As much as I like to consider myself a good, effective communicator, a lot of these things that I'm giving you tips on are things that I still struggle with myself. It's a big part of the reason they made it onto the list in the first place, drawing from personal experience. So work on listening to people without interrupting. Pay attention to body language and other types of nonverbal communication. I did a whole item on this. I think this was item number 4 or 5 on the list from not last week's, from part 1 of this live stream. Paying attention to body language and other types of nonverbal communication was a whole spiel that I went on in part 1, which again, referencing part 1, if you haven't seen it yet, go and check it out. Try to understand people even when you don't agree with them. That, I think, should probably be number 1. If it was me and I was writing this article, I would take this one, which is third down from the top, and I would put that right up at the top, because I think personally that is most people's biggest issue, is that when they find someone that doesn't agree with them or that they don't agree with, they stop even attempting to understand where that person is coming from or understand why they are the way that they are. So I would move that further up the list personally if it was me. Ask people questions to learn more about them and their lives. I think I talked about that like at least 3 or 4 times on the live stream on the 2nd, is ask questions. People love to talk about themselves. It's almost always their favorite thing to talk about is themselves. So use that to your advantage. Ask questions, get people talking. It's a really good way to understand them better, understand where they're coming from better. And it also builds trust. It builds a rapport. It makes them more likely to want to return the favor and ask you questions and get to know you a little better and understand you a little better. It's kind of a give and take, but one of you has to be the first one to give. And if the other person isn't interested, you have to be interested. Again, I think I covered that on the part 1 on the 2nd as well. It was like item number 2 or 3 on the list was be interested, not interesting. Ask questions first and talk about yourself later. And finally, imagine yourself in another person's shoes. That's kind of what kicked off this whole topic, is walk a mile in the other person's shoes. Try to understand where they're coming from. Try to understand their perspective. So that's tip number 7. And we went into pretty good detail on that, but that's because it's very, very, very freaking important. Empathy is so freaking important, and it's super undervalued these days, super underrated, and not practiced nearly enough. So that's why it is tip number 7. Now, moving on here, we're moving on to number 8. Number 8, the tip, number 8's tip, or tip number 8, or whatever you want to say. Never assume that you're right or that you have all of the available information. Always assume that you could be wrong, basically, is what this one boils down to. Never assume that you're right. And I talked about this earlier in the live stream when we were doing one of our opening segments. I said that I was assuming something and how I try to avoid assuming things as much as I can, because when you assume things, we all know how the saying goes. We all know what happens to you and me when we assume things. So don't assume anything if you can avoid it. Definitely don't assume that you are right. And definitely don't assume that you have 100% of the available information, because chances are you don't. Nearly every single other person on the planet knows something that you don't and can teach you something that you don't already know. So just that thought alone is very important to keep in mind when you're talking to people. That thought alone can really drive a lot of empathy. Is this person probably has something to teach me? This person probably knows something that I don't know. That makes you more inclined to want to listen to them, be empathetic with them. And the other thing, the other big reason that you shouldn't just assume that you're right and that you have all the information is that with just the way that the way that the internet works these days, there is so much information coming out all the time, and pretty much every new piece of information that comes out in some way or another contradicts the previous piece of information that came out. So don't jump to any conclusions. Don't just share that article on Facebook just because you see a headline that makes you go, what? That's not a good enough reason to share something. You got to look into it a little bit, maybe wait a couple of days, let more information come out. Never assume you have all the information, you're 100% right, especially when you're talking to someone else. If you're just making a speech or creating some content, making a post, but especially when you're talking to someone face to face, having a conversation with someone, don't assume that you're right and that you have all the answers, because again, they almost certainly know something that you don't know and might have a piece of the puzzle that you're missing that really changes your whole perspective on what it is that you're talking about. Another really good tip just in general that goes hand in hand with not assuming things is, again, ask questions. Ask questions, seek clarity, communicate in as clear and effective a manner as possible, and check in with the person that you're conversing with every once in a while. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well? Do you understand what I'm saying? And ask questions of the other person. I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. Can you rephrase that? What exactly did you mean by that? So again, never understand that, or never understand. Never understand. No, that's the opposite of what I'm trying to teach people here tonight. Never assume that you are right and that you have all of the information. The source example that I came up with this, the reason that this made it onto the list is because of the book that I talked about numerous times on the live stream, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. This is agreement number 3, which is don't make assumptions. Find the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want. Communicate with others as clearly as you can to avoid misunderstandings, sadness, and drama, especially drama. Ain't nobody got time for that. And with just this one agreement, you can completely transform your life. And the whole don't assume thing works both ways. Don't assume that you are right. Don't assume that that person is right. Don't assume that you've got 100% of the information. Don't assume the other person has 100% of the information. Don't assume that you fully understand what the other person was saying. Don't assume the other person fully understands what you were saying. Like it says, find the courage to ask questions, express what you really want, communicate with others as clearly as you can to avoid misunderstandings, sadness, and drama. Ask questions, seek clarity, make sure 100% that you are on the same page with the person or people that you're talking to, and that you are both know what you're talking about, and you're both talking about the same thing, and that you both mean the same things. my girlfriend and I joke and complain about this all the time about how stupid a language English is, because you have some words that are spelt completely the same but pronounced differently and mean two completely different things. And then you've got like 3 different words that are all spelled differently and pronounced differently, but they all mean generally the same thing. Language in and of itself can be kind of confusing. So don't assume that just because someone uses a big fancy word that you every once in a while use yourself. Don't assume that you have the same understanding of that word and are using it the same way, because there's a good chance you're not, just based on how silly English is. So that is tip number 8, the personal life example. Oh yeah, I forgot. I was supposed to be giving real life examples for each of these, and I kind of forgot to do that for tip number 7. I kind of mentioned on it, or talked about it while I was mentioning tip number 7, but the example that I gave is, how many times have you seen someone or even caught yourself seeing a headline on Facebook or social media and just getting all worked up about it and sharing it without oh wait, no, sorry. I'm getting all mixed up. I'm reading the wrong notes. Let me scroll further down the page. Yep, sorry. I'm reading the real life example for reason number 8. For tip number 7, which is practicing empathy and walking a mile in the other person's shoes, the real life example that I did actually kind of briefly touch on is the amount of times that I've caught myself communicating to someone else in a way that would make me shut down if that person was communicating to me that way. Like I think the specific example that I gave while I was talking about tip number 7 was, I tend to get too worked up sometimes. I get a little too emotional. I talk too loud. I talk too fast. My body language gets really intense and aggressive. And if other people were communicating to me in that fashion, it would probably make me shut down. And so I try to catch myself as much as possible, but it doesn't always happen. So that was real life example for tip number 7. Now, flipping back to tip number 8, we're all over the place now. Tip number 8 was, don't assume that you are 100% right and have 100% of the information. Always assume that you could be wrong. And the real life example that I started to talk about was, how many times have you seen someone, a friend, a family member, or you yourself, how many times have you even jumped to share something on Facebook or social media or YouTube just based solely on the headline or based solely on your initial gut reaction to the article? And then you actually go back, you share the article, someone reads the headline, someone actually clicks on the article and reads it and comments saying, you seem to be super worked up about this thing that the headline says, but if you actually read the article, it says something completely different. And then you have to go read the article yourself because you neglected to do that in the first place. And you go, oh yeah, no, you're right. I should have actually read the article because it says something completely different from what the headline is saying. That happens a lot. We've all seen friends and family members do it. We've all probably done it ourselves. I know I have. So don't assume that you are in the right. Don't assume you have 100% of the information, and don't jump to conclusions. So that is tip number 8. I'm going to take a quick sip of water here before we move on to tip number 9. Tip number 9 is another one that I pulled from Mr. Dale Carnegie in one of my favorite books, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Tip number 9 in how to be a better, more effective, more influential communicator. And this is something that, not that I think he is, or not that I think they are, but Justin Trudeau, Theresa Tam, Brian Pallister, Brent Rusin, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, if you're watching, this tip is for you guys. Tip number 9 in effective, influential communication is, if you are wrong, admit that you are wrong. Don't try to pretend like you know what you're doing or you know what you're talking about or that you weren't wrong. If you are wrong and you fucked up and you did something bad, admit it, and admit it right away. If you're wrong, just admit it. You can try and pretend that you're right or that you know what you're talking about, but if, and most likely when, it eventually comes to light that you were lying and just pretending like you were right and pretending that you knew what you were doing, that is going to hurt you and your reputation more in the long run than if you had just admitted to your fuck up right off the bat. One of the main issues that comes with this type of approach is, oh, well, I did something wrong, but I'm going to try to avoid having it come to light. I'm going to try to keep it in the shadows, keep it under wraps, keep it under the rug, try to avoid having anybody find out that I fucked up. And then people find out that you fucked up and that you tried to cover it up. People aren't going to trust you anymore. People aren't going to think that you have any sort of integrity anymore, which you obviously don't if you're trying to cover up your fuck ups. But trust and integrity is very, very important when it comes to communicating with people. If people don't trust you and people don't think that you have integrity, they're not going to want to listen to what you have to say, no matter how right you are, because of the one time that you were wrong and tried to cover it up. So the example, the source example that we're going to touch on is from, again, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Holy shit, look at that. It opened right up to the page that I needed. Okay. From Mr. Carnegie's book, which I believe, again, was printed originally in 1936. So the fact that it's still as useful today as it was back then should say a lot about the authenticity of what Dale wrote in this book. From How to Win Friends and Influence People. Any fool can try to defend his mistakes, and most fools do, but it raises one above the herd and gives one a feeling of nobility and exultation to admit one's mistakes. Absolutely. Think about that for a second. Think about how much better it feels when you admit right away that you fucked up and you own your mistake. Imagine how much better that feels. Think about how much better that feels than if you tried to cover it up and tried to hide the fact that you made a mistake or tried to hide the fact that you were wrong. It feels infinitely better to admit to your fuck up. Now, one of my favorite things about this book is that Dale Carnegie gives great anecdotes and examples to help drive home his points of why these are such important tips. Again, if you're wrong, admit it right away. Pardon me. And the example, one of the examples, because there's like 4 of them crammed into this tiny little chapter, is from Elbert Hubbard, who was a news writer, a media writer from back in the day. Elbert Hubbard was one of the most original authors who ever stirred up a nation, and his stinging sentences often aroused fierce resentments. But Hubbard, with his rare skill for handling people, frequently turned his enemies into friends. For example, when some irritated reader wrote in to say that he didn't agree with such and such an article and ended by calling Hubbard this and that, Elbert Hubbard would answer like this. Quote, "Come to think it over, I don't entirely agree with what I wrote myself. Not everything that I wrote yesterday appeals to me today. I'm glad to learn what you think on the subject. The next time you're in the neighborhood, you must visit us and we'll get this subject threshed out for once and for all. So here is a hand clasp over the miles, and I am yours sincerely." So basically what he's saying is like, I'm happy to hear what you have to say. I'd love it if you could come over and we could shake hands and talk about this like gentlemen, and we'll get to the bottom of it once and for all, rather than talking shit about each other back and forth through the newspaper. What could you say to a man who treated you like that? When we are right, let's try to win people gently and tactfully to our way of thinking. And when we are wrong, and that will be surprisingly often if we are honest with ourselves, let's admit our mistakes quickly and with enthusiasm. That technique will not only produce astonishing results, but believe it or not, it is a lot more fun under the circumstances than trying to defend oneself. Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, the real life example that I came up with for this, and that I'm sure almost everyone watching this right now is going to be able to empathize with and connect with, because at some point we were all kids. So whether you're a parent who has young children now, or whether you were a child at one point, which we all were, that's just how that works. Think back to when you were a kid, or think back to a time when your kids made a mistake, did something wrong, and then tried to hide it and tried to cover it up. How much more trouble did you get in as the child, or how much more trouble do your children get in when they try to hide the fact from you that they fucked up rather than admitting it in the first place? Personally speaking, I don't know about anybody else, but I'd be willing to bet that this is pretty similar for most people watching here tonight. When I was a kid, if I fucked up and then I owned up to it right away and admitted it right away, I got in way less trouble than if I tried to hide it, because ultimately I think most people have heard the same thing from their parents. I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. The thing that upsets me the most is that you lied to me. All these classic parent sayings of like, if you have fucked up, you should have just told us right off the bat. We would have been upset, but we wouldn't have been nearly as upset as we are now, finding out 2 months later that you fucked up 2 months ago and lied to us about it for 2 months. So think back to when you were a kid and how much more trouble you would get in and how much shittier you would feel if you lied to your parents about fucking up and then they found out about it later. If you got away with it, that's all well and good. But if they ever found out about it, so you fucked up and then 2 months later they find out you lied about it and covered it up, you get in so much more trouble than if you were to have just owned up to it right away. So that is tip number 9. If you are wrong, admit it right away. It builds trust, it builds integrity, and it just feels better. So tip number 10. Tip number 10 is something that a lot of people need to work on these days, myself included. Again, this is something I still struggle with myself, but I actually feel like I have a pretty good handle on this one, and I just have the occasional slip. Tip number 10 is don't take things personally. Do your best when you're talking to someone, when you're having a conversation with someone, not to take the things that that person says to you personally, and do your best to keep your emotions in check. Even if you are perfectly validated, even if it's perfectly understandable and perfectly valid for you to get upset and for you to get offended and for you to get worked up and start responding in kind and just calling the other person names and saying things to try to hurt them, even if that's perfectly validated and perfectly warranted based on the situation, it's not going to help the conversation. It's not going to help the conversation move in any sort of meaningful, productive direction. So don't take things personally. Try to keep your emotions in check. One of the best things that you can do for this is self-evaluation. Know what your own triggers are, because we all have our triggers, things that will set us off and get us so worked up. So do your best to know what your own triggers are, and then be prepared for those to come up over the course of the conversation. Because especially when you're talking to people that know you fairly well, close friends, family members, people that you've lived with for 8 years, etc., they know really well what your triggers are just as well as you do. So know what your triggers are in conversation and be prepared for them to come up, and do your best to keep them under control. It's also really important to set boundaries with people. This is something that I mentioned earlier. I still struggle with a lot of the time. Setting boundaries with other people, but also especially setting boundaries with yourself and what you're willing to allow yourself to rise to and what you're willing to allow yourself to participate in. Give people chances, because sometimes people just make honest mistakes, but then know when is a good time to just say, you know what, this isn't worth my time anymore, and walk away. That's one of the most important boundaries that you can learn to set, is just when someone starts trying to take things to a personal level, attacking you and your character, making fun of you as a person. That's a pretty good sign most of the time that this person is no longer, if they ever were, interested in having an actual honest to God conversation and coming to some sort of productive conclusion. And they're just trying to hurt you and get you worked up and get you to sink down to their level. That's usually a pretty good time to turn around and walk away, as far as I'm concerned. It's, to most people anyways, especially most logical, rational thinking people that are aware of what's going on when they're having a conversation with someone, it's really easy to tell when the person you're talking to isn't really interested in talking anymore, and they're just trying to like score points or get you worked up. So don't take things personally. Again, we're going to touch on the 4 agreements for this, because this is taken directly from the 4 agreements. This is agreement number 2 from Don Miguel Ruiz's book. Don't take anything personally. Nothing others do or say is because of you. What others say and do is a projection of their own reality and their own dream and their own perspective as well. When you are immune to the opinions and actions of others, you will no longer be the victim of needless suffering. This is something I've been talking about quite a bit with people as well lately. People's opinions and thoughts of you only matter if you allow them to. So choose very carefully whose opinions and whose thoughts of you allow to matter to you, because everybody has opinions on you and everybody has thoughts about you. Most of them are completely invalid and unwarranted and aren't worth your time or mental effort. So be very selective about whose opinions of you do allow to affect you. But don't take anything personally. People are going to call you names. People are going to try to tear you down. People are going to try to get you worked up. People are going to try to score points on you. Don't fall for it. Don't sink to their level. Just turn around and walk away. Don't take anything personally. As soon as it starts to go to a personal level, try your best to steer it back towards a productive, conducive, conversational flow. But like I said, it becomes pretty painfully obvious when the person doesn't actually want to talk to you and have a conversation anymore. And at that point, just turn around and walk away. Personal real life example from this. Just earlier this week, later last week, I posted several screenshots to a social media account of mine from an article. Specifically this article from the National Post. Alex, if you're still there, you can pull this up. That'd be great. This article from the National Post from exactly a week ago, August 23rd, 2021. Yet another famous psychology study turns out to be pure bunk. Basically, what this article is talking about is how psychological science has been suffering a replication crisis for a decade now. But this week, there was a blah, 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 blah. We are going to go into the details of the actual paper. We're going to roll down to... Okay. I thought it went into more detail about the replication crisis or the replicability crisis in science. But I'm going to post this article to the Discord server after the show tonight as well. But this is the article that I was posting screenshots from. And basically all the screenshots were saying is that psychological science in general, but especially psychological science, has been suffering from a replicability crisis for decades, years, if not decades now at this point. Replicability crisis, meaning that there's all these scientific studies that got done that people use to push public policy that can't then be replicated or recreated. So they do one scientific study or one piece of research and say, this is the result that we came up with. And they let that basically be the gospel now, for lack of a better word, when in reality, what is supposed to happen is you're supposed to go, okay, we ran this test or we did this research and these are the results that we came up with. We're going to make it available to a bunch of other people now and try to have other people run the same experiment and see if they come up with the same results. It's called replicability. It's one of the fundamental, foundational, like pillar tenets, whatever you want to call it, of how the scientific method actually works. You can't just get one result from one test and consider that scientific consensus. You're supposed to be able to get a bunch of different people from a bunch of different or at least from a bunch of different places and a bunch of different labs, whatever, do the same experiment and come up with hopefully the same result, ideally, is what you're looking for or not looking for. I guess it depends on how you want to, depends on what the research is that you're doing and what the experiment is that you're doing. But again, like I said, this article is talking about how there's a replicability crisis in psychological science, psychology science especially, but just in science in general for the last decade or two. We've been basing a lot of public policy and making a lot of rules and a lot of guidelines based on science that has not and or cannot be repeated or replicated, which is a huge fucking problem. So I shared screenshots from this article to my social media account. And I think about 40 or 50 people saw it, according to the statistics and the analytics on my account. All but only one person responded to what I actually posted. A lot of people saw it. Most people probably just saw it, processed it, went on about their day, didn't really think too much of it. The one person, however, that did respond to it, went out of their way to make sure that I knew that they wanted to know that I'm using my platform to spread disinformation, even though this is an article from the National Post, which is like one of the approved sources, and it's a peer-reviewed paper, and it's like there's really nothing in the article that there to be argued with, right? It's just saying there's a replicability problem with science these days. We need to be able to start repeating and replicating these scientific results if we want to take them more seriously. That's really the only point that the paper is making. And I got told that I'm using my platform to spread disinformation, that I'm a fucking moron if I think that I know better than these scientists, and that I just need to shut up and trust the experts and listen to the science, basically. Again, none of those things have anything to do or were addressing any of the points made by myself about the article or made in the article itself. It was just basically name calling right off the bat. Like, she didn't like what I had to say, But rather than addressing any of the points that I made, she just started calling me a moron, telling me I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about, telling me I was using my platform to spread disinformation. And my response to that, which I thought of probably half a dozen responses that I would have liked to type back, was I just deleted the message. I don't have time. Like, I don't give a shit about this person's opinion in the first place. That's something I was just talking about a few minutes ago. Be very selective about whose opinions you let matter to you. This person's opinion means fucking nothing to me. So why would I take the time and effort to respond to them? So set your boundaries and know when to walk away. So that was tip number 10. Tip number 10 is don't take things personally and know when to walk away, basically, when things do get taken to a personal level. Science is a liar sometimes. You recognize that Always Sunny quote? I didn't see it, Steven, sorry. But that is actually one of the things that they talk about in that article from the National Post about how sometimes scientists are just wrong. They make honest mistakes just like any other person. But in this article, in the paper in question, it was just straight up bullshit, basically. The people just came up with random numbers in order to support their conclusion. She sounds super educated to begin with. Oh yeah, no, it's if I showed you like not that I would, because I don't like invading people's privacy like that, but if I was to like show you a picture of this person, if I was to like show you a picture of this person and kind of give you a brief background of like what their beliefs and what their stances on things are, you probably you're probably already picturing the right person. Like
I saw the quote. I saw what they wrote before you deleted it.
Yeah.
So
it was pretty awesome. Fuck man. It was so funny. But anyways, so that was tip number 10. Tip number 10, don't take things personally. Know when to walk away. It's like, it was like Willie Nelson said, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. And that response that I got to that story that I shared was a run moment. It's like, we're just going to delete that message and we're going to run away in the other direction because
exit.
It's not, Control, Alt, Delete, get out of here, do a hard reset. Okay. Tip number 11. I don't really have a source.
I was being facetious. It's like,
facetious. I don't really have a source for tip number 11. It didn't come out of the book. It didn't come out of How to Win Friends and Influence People. It didn't come out of the 4 Agreements. It didn't come out of Start With Why. This is just kind of something that I came up with on my own that I've noticed myself. Tip number 11 is know what the fuck you're talking about. That's kind of important when you're trying to converse. Oh, was that Kenny Rogers? Damn it. I thought it was Willie Nelson. Sorry, Steve. Oh, yeah, no, you're right. Oh, now I hear the voice. Yeah, no, you're right. So anyways, as I was saying, tip number 11 is know what the fuck you're talking about and bring your receipts. Show your receipts. Show your work, basically. So ultimately what I mean by that is, yes, The Gambler. I knew the song. Ultimately what I mean by that is that you should be able to back up the things that you're saying with actual like statistics, data, evidence, things like that. Do your best not to just, I saw this interesting article on Facebook. I'm not going to save it. I'm not going to share it. I'm just going to try to remember it. Chances are you'll forget to even mention it if you just try to remember it. And then if you do remember to mention it, you're probably going to misremember and misrepresent a lot of the things that you read because human memory is kind of a fickle bitch. Like I said, do your best to bring your receipts. If you see an article that you are going to talk about in the future, save it, bookmark it. Cell phones make that incredibly easy these days. I have entire folders on my browser and entire folders in my camera roll dedicated to screenshots, screen recordings, bookmarks, saved links, saved articles. So if I'm ever trying to talk about something and I go, what was it exactly? What was that exact number? What outlet was it from? I can go and pull it up right away. It's super fast. Cell phones are pretty fast these days. You can save a bunch of things on them. So like I said, bring your receipts, show your work, rather than trying to just remember things and spout off dates and facts and figures and statistics and shit like that from the top of your head, which most people are horrible at. And just bring the things with you, bring the papers with you. It's really easy. Everybody's always got their cell phone on them these days. So bookmark things, save things, and know what you're talking about rather than just, I saw this article on Facebook about this thing that Justin Trudeau said, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember not really liking it very much. And it was something to do with voter integrity and something about COVID vaccine passports. That's not helpful. That's not getting anybody anywhere. Have that article ready, and you can be like, oh, this is exactly what Justin Trudeau said, and now I remember exactly what my thoughts and feelings on it were. So like I said, I don't really have like...
Show your work.
Show your work, exactly. And know what you're talking about, basically. Like,
Yes.
make sure that you can form coherent sentences, Joe Biden. Make sure that you understand the words that you're using. Make sure that you can pronounce the words properly that you're using. Proper grammar, punctuation, things like that. And written communication is very, very important. The lifted mask mandate was a night while it lasted. Yeah, agreed. But yeah, just like I said, try your best to at least sound like you know what you're talking about. And worst case scenario, do your research and do your studying and actually know what you're talking about. And if it's hard for most people, like it is for most people, to remember off the top of your head dates, facts, figures, names, locations, etc., save things, bookmark things. Your cell phone makes it super easy. You can save articles on Facebook. You can bookmark things on your internet browser. You can screenshot things. You can screen record things. So bring your receipts, show your work, and do your best to know what the fuck you're talking about, if possible. That's always super helpful. Real life example. It's basically what I wrote is that it's a lot harder for people to write you off as a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist when you're backing up your arguments with like facts and figures from the CDC website and from Stats Canada and from all these quote unquote official sources that give the official numbers and help the official narrative or whatever. When you're using those numbers and those resources to back up the points that you're making, it's really hard for people to, or I shouldn't say really hard, it's at least harder for people to just automatically dismiss you and write you off as a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. Yeah, you need to have facts to back up your arguments, exactly. And even if you sometimes have facts, depending on the outlet that it's coming from, people can be like, oh, well, that's from fucking Bible News Weekly or whatever. So they clearly have a bias, which is true. So then it's use resources that are from their approved list of sources or whatever type of thing. Although there's those out there who will still write you off. Yeah, absolutely, Angelica, for sure. There's always people out there that are going to write you off just because they don't like what you have to say. Doesn't matter how right you are, doesn't matter how much data you have to back up your points. Some people just aren't going to want to listen to you because, well, I mean, some people are just assholes. And some people are just so set in their ways and so dug into their convictions that they're not going to change their opinions and change their minds on things, no matter how much conflicting and contradicting evidence you show them.
And it's not worth your time to try and convince me there. You're just wasting more things you could do with.
Exactly. There are so many more productive things that you could be doing with your time. So that was tip number 11. Know what you're talking about and bring your receipts. The final tip. Tip number 12. We're in the home stretch here, ladies and gentlemen. Tip number 12 is kind of advice on how you can go about criticizing other people or pointing out other people's mistakes without immediately offending people to the point where they don't want to listen to you. What was that comment from Steve? I told the vest idiots that I don't have to provide proof of an exemption by law and that it's protected under the Privacy Act. Okay, well, only piece of advice that I would offer there is maybe referring to them as vest idiots isn't the best way to get them to want to listen to what you have to say. I think this is one of the tips that I gave in part 1 back on August 2nd. Try to avoid calling people
He was late to that show.
I remember that. I remember that too. Yeah, no, I remember that too. He was late to that show. So yeah, that was one of the tips that I gave in part 1 of this live stream was if you want people to take what you have to say seriously. Okay, he just says he says I didn't say that to them. Of course. Well, that's good. That's good news then. So yeah, I was threatened with a ticket at Polo Park a few days ago for walking through the mall without a mask. Yeah, I've pulled it up on the web on the live stream before, and I can even probably pull it up right now, actually, if we go into my bookmarks. Manitoba masks. Yeah, here we go. Ongoing response, City of Winnipeg. Let's open this up, shall we? So this is the City of Winnipeg's ongoing response page, ongoing pandemic response page. As far as I know, it still hasn't been updated. Last updated. Oh no, that's not what that is. Last updated July 7th, 2021. So this web page was last updated July 7th, 2021. And under the FAQs section, if you scroll just a little ways down the page, you have your frequently asked questions regarding the ongoing pandemic response. Question number 5 is, do I need to prove that I am exempt from wearing a face mask? No. All persons are expected to make good personal decisions regarding use of face masks and would not be expected to provide evidence to support their decision. Members of the public will not be denied service for not wearing a face mask, and the city of Winnipeg is not responsible for enforcing public health orders. That responsibility is the province of Manitoba's. I'm going to post this to the Discord server. I'm going to link this to the Discord server after the show as well tonight. I've talked about this before. Have that web page open and have that web page handy on your cell phone. Like have a browser, internet browser open on your phone and have that page open and ready to go. So that when you have those conversations and they go, we need to see some documentation that you have a medical exemption, you can turn around and go, well, I don't have any documentation that I can show you regarding my exemption, but I can show you this web page from the city of Winnipeg that says that you're not allowed to ask me for proof of my exemption. That's usually good enough for me to get people to leave me the fuck alone. That was the tactic that I was taking.
Each province has a different one. There is one
Absolutely.
for each province. So if you're in different provinces, grab that one from that specific province.
Yeah. Ken Orling says, get your fax machine straight. Got it. Ken, if you're still using a fax machine, there aren't enough effective communication tips that I can give you that's going to fix that problem. Because you can be the most effective communicator in the world. If you're using a fax machine, it's not going to get there in time for that communication to be effective. It's going to take just too goddamn long. I just stated the legal facts to them. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. But it's one thing to just say these are the legal facts, and it's another thing to be able to pull up again the city of Winnipeg's own website and show them the web page where it says you're not allowed to ask me for proof of my exemption and you're not allowed to deny me service for not wearing a mask. There's a big difference between showing them from the city of Winnipeg website and just saying this is what the facts are, because they don't fucking know if you're telling the truth. For all they know, you're just bullshitting them in order to try and get into the store without wearing a mask. So tip number 12, as I was saying before I got a little sidetracked, what else is new? This is kind of a tip or advice on how you can criticize other people or point out other people's mistakes without automatically having them just want to shut down and not listen to a single word that you have to say. Tip number 12 is admit your own mistakes before pointing out others, or criticize yourself first before you criticize others. So if you do have to criticize someone or point out their mistake, which granted, I say this all the time, if you do have to do it, then you have to do it. Most of the time though, you don't have to do it. Like if there's just a slight misunderstanding or someone makes a mistake, or if someone deserves a little, or you feel like someone deserves a little criticism, most of the time, just in casual day-to-day conversation, it's not worth even addressing. But in those rare instances where you're in like a work setting, a professional setting, a more legitimate official setting where things need to be done right, if someone does warrant criticism or does make a mistake that needs to be pointed out, one of the best ways that you can go about doing that so that they actually respond well to it is to point out your own mistakes or refer to your own mistakes first before pointing out, or immediately after pointing out their mistakes, or criticize yourself for something similar first before you criticize someone for that thing. So the example that I'm going to use again comes from How to Win Friends and Influence People by Mr. Dale Carnegie. This is chapter 2 of part 4. I was going to say chapter 2. It's 3/4 of the way through the book, but it's chapter 2 of part 4. How to criticize and not be hated for it. Charles Schwab, was passing through one of his steel mills one day at noon when he came across some of his employees smoking. This is not the right page. I want page 179. Sorry, my bad. I was one page behind. This is from part 4, chapter 3. Talk about your own mistakes first. A few years ago, my niece, Josephine Carnegie, left her home in Kansas City and came to New York to act as my secretary. She was 19, had graduated from high school 3 years prior, and her business experience was a trifle more than zero. Today, she's one of the most perfect secretaries west of the Suez, but in the beginning, she was, well, susceptible to improvement, which is basically a really, really nice way of saying she kind of sucked at her job. One day when I started to criticize her, I said to myself, just a minute, Dale Carnegie, just a minute. You are twice as old as Josephine. You have had 10,000 times the business experience. How can you possibly expect her to have your viewpoints, your judgments, and your initiatives, mediocre though they may be? And just a minute, Dale, what were you doing at 19 years of age? Remember the asinine mistakes and blunders you made? Remember the time you did this and that? After thinking the matter over, honestly and impartially, I concluded that Josephine's batting average at 19 was far better than mine had been, and that, I'm sorry to confess, isn't paying Josephine much of a compliment. So after that, when I wanted to call Josephine's attention to a mistake, I used to begin by saying, quote, "You have made a mistake, Josephine, but Lord knows it's no worse than the many that I have made. You are not born with good judgment. That comes only with experience, and you are better than I was at your age. I have been guilty of so many stupid, silly things myself. I have very little inclination to criticize you or anyone. But don't you think it would have been wiser if you had chosen to do so-and-so instead of so-and-so?" So basically what he's saying is just butter the crap out of people. If you're going to criticize them, either make fun of yourself first, criticize yourself first, admit that you've made the same mistakes first, and just generally butter the person up first. It isn't nearly so difficult to listen to a recital of your own faults if the criticizer begins by humbly admitting that he too is far from impeccable. I'm going to repeat that sentence because I feel like it sums up this whole point pretty nicely. It isn't nearly so difficult to listen to a recital of your own faults if the criticizer begins by humbly admitting that he too is far from impeccable. So that was the source example. That's the example that Dale Carnegie gave in How to Win Friends and Influence People. My example from my real life is when I'm talking to someone, having a conversation with someone, and I feel like this person is getting a little too worked up, a little too emotional, a little too intense, which for me is a very, very high bar to get over. I had talked about this a couple of times earlier in the stream. I myself tend to get way too worked up and tense and stressed out when I have conversations with people sometimes. So that's a very high bar for me to reach, or a very high threshold for me to reach. But if on the off chance that the person that I'm talking to does reach that threshold, I do my best to gently and calmly point out to them that I feel that they're getting a little too worked up, and I feel like they're getting a little too anxious and a little too emotional. I explain that I feel like it's detrimental to the overall point of the conversation. And I make sure that I am aware of this because of extensive personal experience in my own past, where I myself have gotten too worked up and too emotional and too tense, and it kind of derails the whole conversation, and things either come to an unsatisfying conclusion or no conclusion at all, which is about as unsatisfying as a conclusion can get. So like I said, if I'm talking to someone and they're getting too worked up, too emotional, too intense, I just do my best to gently point out, hey, I think we're getting a little too worked up here. It's probably not going to be conducive and productive to the conversation that we're trying to have here. And I know this because I make the same mistake myself all the freaking time. I have done it all the time in the past. I still find myself doing it all the time. So that's usually the way that I would try to handle it is, hey man, I know this is a very intense topic. I know that we're getting a little too worked up here. We're getting really emotional. I don't think it's very productive. I don't think it's going to yield very positive results. And I say this speaking from massive personal past experience because I am guilty of this myself all the time. So tip number 12 is admit to your own mistakes before pointing out other people's mistakes, or criticize yourself first before you have to criticize others, if it's even necessary in the first place to criticize or point out someone else's mistakes, which again, in casual day-to-day conversation is almost never necessary. But if and when it does become necessary to criticize or point out someone else's mistakes, do so by pointing out your own mistakes and your own flaws first and relating to the person and building that connection of like, hey, it's all cool. It's all good. I've made the same mistake. We all make the same mistake. It's not that big of a deal. So quick recap. That was the end. That was tip number 12. Quick recap here before we start to say our goodnights. Tip number 7 was practice empathy and do your best to walk a mile in the other person's shoes. Try to understand where the other person is coming from. Try to understand why they're responding the way they are. Tip number 8, Don't assume that you are right or that you have all the information. Always work under the assumption that you could possibly be wrong, or at the very least missing a very important piece of contextual information. Tip number 9, if you're wrong, admit it. Just admit it right away. It feels better. It makes people less angry at you. It doesn't degrade and erode the trust that people have in you and make people think that you have absolutely zero character and zero integrity. If you're wrong, just admit that you're wrong. It's just better. Tip number 10, don't take things personally and know when to walk away. When things start going to that personal level, when people start saying that you're using your platform to spread misinformation and calling you a fucking moron and saying that you don't know what you're talking about and you're an idiot if you think you know better than these people, that's pretty good indication that it's time to just be like, you know what? You're trying to like hurt me. You're trying to score points on me. You're trying to get me to sink down to your level. It ain't going to happen. I'm going to not take the things that you said personally, and I'm just going to delete your message and walk away. So that's tip number 10. Don't take things personally. Tip number 11. Know what you're talking about. Do your best to know what you're talking about and bring your receipts and show your work if at all possible. Save articles, bookmark articles, screenshot things, screen record things, and just make sure that you can actually back up the shit that you are talking. And tip number 12, admit to your own mistakes before pointing out others and criticize yourself before criticizing others. Just relate your own criticisms, your own flaws, and your own mistakes to the person when you have to point them out to it. Again, like I was just saying, it's okay, you made this mistake, but it's fine. I made the same mistake when I first started, when I was your age, blah, blah, blah. It's not that big of a deal. It's really, really, really effective way to get people to actually listen to the criticism and the feedback that you have. If you go, you know what, I made the same mistake. It's all good. Let's figure out how to do it better together. So those are your 12 effective communication tips. Well, I guess that was 7 through 12. Again, if you missed 1 through 6, you're going to have to go back and rewatch part 1 from August 2nd, 2021. Was this comment from Angelica? She said, I actually put the focus on myself. Can actually make things worse if you point out they're getting too emotional, especially if you're talking to a woman, but not exclusively, though. That's a good point. Yeah, absolutely, it can make things worse, for sure. But my feelings on the matter is, if it's going to go bad, it's going to go bad. If it's getting to the point where this person is getting so worked up and getting so emotional that you feel like you have to step in and say something, yeah, there's a chance that you stepping in and saying something might go wrong, but the conversation was already kind of going wrong in the first place, which is why you feel the need to step in and say something in the first place. So I totally understand where you're coming from, Angelica, and trying to focus more on yourself and trying to be a mirror, I would say, or project your attitude and your behavior and your perspective, your energy onto the other person. But like you said, it can kind of backfire when you point these things out. But the conversation, if you're feeling like you need to step in and point something like that out, the conversation was probably already starting to go south in the first place. So what have you got to lose at that point? So that is the end of the show. We got a few more things to cover before we get out of here, but I want to say thank you, everybody, for tuning in for the last year or so. I think it's been just around a year that I've been doing these live streams with Winnipeg Alternative Media. Tonight, if you're just tuning in now, I haven't mentioned it for a while. This is going to be my last live stream. For now, at least. As we've been saying, I'm taking an indefinite hiatus. So just kind of leaving the door open just a crack for me to potentially come back at some point in the future and make a glorious, triumphant return to live streaming with Winnipeg Alternative Media. But as of right now, for the time being, tonight's show was the last show. What about the Chris Sky question? Oh, I didn't even see it. Sorry. Sometime when I'm reading my articles and scrolling and doing my thing, I don't see the questions pop up on my screen. So sometimes I just miss them. What's Shawn's opinion of Chris Sky and his recent visit at the U of W and being arrested again after the speech? Chris Sky has a lot of very good points to make from what I can tell. I'm not a huge fan of the way he goes about handling himself a lot of the time or presenting the points that he has to make a lot of the time. And he seems lately, especially, like he has found ways to enrich himself, especially through doing these appearances. So I don't know. I haven't been paying too close attention to the whole Chris Sky thing. From my 1,000-foot view being pulled back, I see a lot of talk from Chris about how this is about people's rights, this is about people's freedoms, this is about doing the right thing. But then I also saw a video where Chris was talking about how we're not going to go to this place to do a rally. We're going to go to this place to do a rally because I stand to make $20,000 or something like that. That's not a great look as far as I'm concerned. So like I said,
and he's not putting the money back into helping out. He's keeping it for himself. I haven't seen any like, oh, we're going to fund, the nurses movement. We're going to go fund this and that and help out new teachers and stuff. But no. He's counting money in his pocket. He's just another politician.
Yeah. It's like I said, I haven't been paying close enough attention to the whole Chris Sky thing for a while now to make a definitive stance on it one way or the other. But from what I can tell, there seems to be some inauthenticity coming from Mr. Sky, where again, like I said, it's a lot of talk from Chris about how it's about doing the right thing. It's about standing up for the people and their rights and their freedoms. And then you see this video of him saying, we're not going to go to Winnipeg. We're going to go to Calgary instead because we can make $20,000. So it's not a great look, but that's he was here just recently. Absolutely. He attended a rally at the U of W and was arrested. I believe he was released either later that same night or early the next morning. I think at this point, that's all part of his shtick, is the whole showing up to places specifically to get arrested. It kind of helps spread the word more, keeps more eyes on him. I think that's kind of all part of the game at this point. I think he expects to get arrested now going into these things. I think that's all kind of part of his game plan, like the cost of doing business type thing. But that's kind of my thoughts and opinions. Like I said, I don't really have anything too firm or hard on Chris Sky because I haven't really been paying that much attention. I've been too busy doing my own thing recently. Anyways, thank you for the question. Even though this isn't a live stream Q&A, I always love answering questions and giving my opinion. At this point, I think it's pretty obvious to everybody that I love talking and I love the sound of my own voice. So I never mind answering questions. He might be a guest on Lynn Nelson's show. So if you want to ask him the hard questions, tune in. There you go. Who was that was asking? Stephen Hayes. Yeah, Stephen Hayes. There you go, Stephen. He apparently might be a guest on Lynn Nelson's podcast live stream coming up soon. So if you want, you can just ask him yourself. So thank you again to everybody for tuning in tonight. As we mentioned earlier a few times, this is the last live stream for the foreseeable future. I might come back in the future. I might not. We'll see how it goes. As of right now, this is the finale of Media Watchdog Weekly. I want to thank you all again for tuning in and giving me such an amazing platform to work off of and to build on myself up on over the last year or so, I want to say. I think it's been right around a year that I've been doing these live streams. Thank you for always participating, for giving me the views, for asking me the questions on the live stream Q&As, for sending me articles and topics to talk about on the live stream. It's always much appreciated. And hopefully we all get to see each other again in the future. Maybe I'll, like I said, at the top of the show, maybe I'll pop in every once in a while when I get really worked up to do a Wham Rants. Maybe I'll pop in as a guest on other people's live streams every once in a while. But Media Watchdog Weekly in its current form will be no more after the end of tonight's live stream. And on that note, I'm going to wrap up tonight's live stream here with just some ending announcements, housekeeping, as we always do at the end of these streams. Media Watchdog Weekly was just streaming live to both Winnipeg Alternative Media and the Mactown Smackdown. You can find both of those platforms on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Odyssey. Just go and search any social media platform that you're already a part of. Search for Winnipeg Alternative Media and the Mactown Smackdown. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us a share everything you can, every chance you get. It helps spread the word, helps grow the platform, helps us reach more people. And that's ultimately the main goal of media platforms and media outlets, is to reach as many people as possible. In the increasingly likely chance moving forward that we get removed from Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, etc., you can find everything Winnipeg Alternative Media backed up and archived on our new website, winnipegalternativemedia.live. That should be popping up right there. Just perfect timing. Go to winnipegalternativemedia.live. You'll find all the old podcasts, all the old live streams, most of our old posts, pretty much everything eventually that we've covered and that we've created as content. Winnipeg Alternative Media is going to be backed up onto that website eventually. So go and check it out if you want more from Winnipeg Alternative Media. While you're there, you can scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, and there's a big button right in the middle of the page that lets you download Winnipeg Alternative Media's new streaming app. Yes, that is right. Winnipeg Alternative Media has their own streaming app. So make sure you go to winnipegalternativemedia.live and give it a download. It's another great way to help support the show. And also, while you're at winnipegalternativemedia.live, one of the best ways that you can help support the show in a more direct financial monetary sense, because as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're all volunteers here at Winnipeg Alternative Media. We don't make one red hot cent to do the work that we do. One of the best ways that you can help support Winnipeg Alternative Media monetarily, because there are still costs that go into keeping this show running, is to go to winnipegalternativemedia.live and pick up some sweet Winnipeg Alternative Media branded merch. We got t-shirts, tank tops, crop tops, zip-up hoodies, pullover hoodies, children's clothing, hats, pretty much anything, any article of clothing that you can think of that you might want to get Winnipeg Alternative Media's logo printed on, you can get Winnipeg Alternative Media's logo printed on it. So either go to the website and find some merch there, or you can reach out to us at winnipegaltmedia@gmail.com, and we'll set up some custom clothing orders for you, and we'll get that all taken care of. And final thing before we say goodnight and get out of here, everything that we talked about tonight, all the articles that we looked at, all the web pages that we went and visited together, everything we looked at and covered together tonight is going to be immediately posted to the Winnipeg Alternative Media Discord server following tonight's show. I highly recommend that you go and check it out. We've posted the link to it in the comments section already. Go join the Winnipeg Alternative Media Discord server. Pull up the open side tab thing that takes you to all the different channels. Go to the Media Watchdog Weekly channel specifically, and that is where you will find all of the articles and all the links and all the resources, not only from tonight's live stream, but from every live stream I've ever done with Winnipeg Alternative Media. There's got to be, I'm going to say close to probably I want to say close to 250 links and resources and references and citations in that channel by now. Go to Winnipeg Alternative Media Discord server, go to the Media Watchdog Weekly channel. And like I said, you can check out all the articles and all the references and all the resources we looked at tonight and from every other show I've ever done with Winnipeg Alternative Media. Highly recommend that you go and check it out. As I say every week here, we're not here to tell people what to do, tell people what to think, tell people how to live. We're just here to present information as objectively as possible in as unbiased a way as we can, and encourage people to do with that information what they will. Read it for yourself, think about it for yourself, come to your own conclusions, make your own decisions, and live your own life. That's ultimately what we're here to encourage people to do. So go and join the Winnipeg Alternative Media Discord server and go and check out all the material for yourself. And once again, thank you all for tuning in tonight. It's been an awesome ride. There's been ups, there's been downs, there's been manic anxiety, there's been manic depression, there's been manic euphoria. I've been all over the map with doing these live streams with Winnipeg Alternative Media. But looking back on it all now,
he's been shaved, he's been unshaved. I've
had short hair, I've had long hair. We've been all over the map here with these live streams with Winnipeg Alternative Media. Looking back now, almost a year later, there's not really a whole lot that I would have done differently. I have zero regrets whatsoever. So thank you to all the awesome viewers for always tuning in to my live streams every week. Thank you to Todd, especially Mr. McDougall, for founding Winnipeg Alternative Media and giving me this platform to work off of in the first place. And thank you to all my awesome peers and coworkers at Winnipeg Alternative Media, especially you, Alex, my good friend from out in Edmonton, Alberta, for always pulling the switches and pushing the buttons and turning the knobs and whatever from behind the scenes. So yeah, I guess to avoid talking in circles any longer.
Preventing the reactor from melting down.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. You got a 42G or whatever in Sector 7. Sector 7G. But so to avoid talking in circles any more than I already have and rambling and ranting and raving any more than I already have, I'm just going to leave it there. And I'm going to say for the final time, good night, Canada.